I know you want the Breath of the Wild sequel. We all do, okay? But a polished remake of a Zelda classic is a decent way to kill some time while we wait. The big question on everyone's mind is, how different is the new Link's Awakening? Let's start with the obvious. The new one looks way better. I mean, it's not even fair. The first Link's Awakening came out when those giant, clunky desktop computers were still a thing. Back then, just running a game on a handheld system like the Gameboy felt like a modern miracle. Most of the memory was dedicated to the game itself, so graphics and sound always took a backseat. You had your pick between grayscale and green scale, and all the thing could manage was some boops and beeps. I mean, they were still catchy boops and beeps. Point is, even with an arm tied behind its back, Link's Awakening managed to be an awesome game. A few years later, Link's Awakening DX added some more colors into the mix for the Game Boy Color. It even got a new color-centric dungeon. But this newest Switch version blows both of them out of the water. The resolution jumped from 160 by 144 on the Game Boy to 1280 by 720 on the Switch's handheld mode. It's a drastic difference that anyone would notice, even without hearing the specs. Don't get me wrong though, Link's Awakening looks great for 1993. Nintendo made the most of those hardware limitations. Still, translating those old pixels into stunning HD is easier said than done. But I'm not gonna get into it just yet. First, I want to talk about the biggest change outside of the pretty new graphics. Yes, there's a brand spanking new dungeon creator. And that's not just new to Link's Awakening. It's a first for the whole Zelda series. This isn't some minor tacked on feature. This whole remake came around because the single panel rooms of Link's Awakening dungeons were the best fit for this feature. Here's the idea. There's a new building near Telltale Heights called the Chamber Dungeon. You can find a warp pad that brings you straight there. It replaces the camera shop from Link's Awakening DX. When you go in the Chamber Dungeon, you're greeted by Dampé? Like, the Gravekeeper from Ocarina of Time? What the hell is Dampé doing here? I assure you, Dampé was not in the original. He was merely the twinkle in some developer's eye. He's been in a bunch of Zelda games since Ocarina, so it's nice to see he's still getting work. Anyway, for this go-around, Dampé picked up creating chamber dungeons as his new hobby. Basically, he gets a huge thrill from watching Link almost die. Dampé invites you to rearrange the rooms of any dungeons you've played so far into a customizable extravaganza, and will even give you a few of his own creations. Just arranging your dungeon is its own puzzle, and I honestly think it's the highlight of this new feature. It's half the fun. There's a few rules. Your custom dungeon has to have a nightmare lair, and an entrance, of course. The doors have to all connect to one another. You can't customize what's in each chamber, only the way that they all connect to each other. You also have to keep other things in mind, like making sure there are enough keys in your dungeon for all of the locked doors. There are even challenges just for arranging these dungeons. The first ones help you get comfortable with the mode, but there are 2 and 3 shovel-level challenges to force you to deal with tricky placement. But trust me, I found the first ones tricky enough. Of course, once you're down, you get to play your creation. You get some rupees out of it, which is helpful when you're saving up for that bow and arrow, and you eventually get some other goodies, like a bottle. And if you make a really sweet dungeon, you can share it. Back in 1993, we'd have to use a link cable. No relation. But this is the modern age, and in the modern age, how do we share our dungeons? We store them in our amiibos. Duh. So yeah, you can upload your dungeon to your amiibo and then bring it over to a friend's house and watch them suffer through your dungeon. Unfortunately, you can't share dungeons online. I know. Amiibo have other uses in this mode too. The new Link's Awakening amiibo gives you a Shadow Link who will chase you around your dungeon. Other than that, if you have any other Legend of Zelda amiibo laying around the house, you can scan up to 5 of them, in any order, to receive 5 new chambers, including a Great Fairy Chamber and an Armos Knight Chamber. So, yes, Dampé is back and looking better than ever. But it's not just because of the souped-up graphics. The developers had to figure out how to reimagine the art style while still staying true to the original's vibe. What they landed on amounts to the most dramatic shift in Zelda visuals since Wind Waker. At first, fans were in an uproar over Wind Waker's toony style, but Link's Awakening hasn't gotten that kind of backlash. Like, at all. Here's why I think players are falling in love with the new look. It has a clay-like diorama vibe, so it perfectly complements the sort of miniature feeling of an old Game Boy game. And that's exactly what the developers were going for, especially with the camera angle. It feels like you're peeking in on a bunch of toys. It's dreamlike, lighthearted, playful, and it just feels right? Another side effect of redesigning the game is that we can actually have 3D images. The new Link's Awakening still plays like a Game Boy game. You're not flying around three-dimensional space like in Breath of the Wild. But we get some dimension and some shadows to our settings and characters. Even though everything looks new, there's still so much that's super familiar. Once you step out of Marin's house into Koholint, you'll notice that this remake is shockingly faithful to the original. We're talking one-to-one, frame by frame. Like, the field to the right of Marin's house has the exact same number of bushes. Seriously, I can't overstate how much painstaking care must have gone into translating the original game's designs directly into this new style. Houses are the same shape, the sand on the beach has exactly the same wavy texture, the flowers on the ground still come only in pairs, and they're in the exact same spots. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. Not everything is one-to-one though. Richard's house, for instance, has been shuffled around somewhat and looks exceptionally more lavish. A few landscapes have been altered, and there's more palm trees. Of course, the items themselves can also have more detail. In the new version, Link's shield is very clearly the Hylian shield we've grown to know and love since higher def games like Ocarina of Time. But it's not just Link's gear that's getting a new coat of paint. With the updated style comes updated character designs as well. The character redesigns are still incredibly faithful, but the amount of new detail that HD allows is even more staggering. We're dealing with figures that on screen are relatively small, and were therefore harder to detail in pixeldom. To fill in the details, it appears that the new designers took more cues from the official artwork for Link's Awakening than from the game itself. Look at Marin. She's wearing the same blue dress, pinkish sash, and red flower in her hair that she sports in the artwork. Even in the DX version, Marin's dress just looked yellow, and she certainly didn't have that jaunty hair flower. There are some brand new details, but they're pretty minor. Link gets some white leggings, the owl gets some pink triangles interwoven with the zigzags on its wings, that kind of stuff. Oddly enough, Terran's little kerchief clip is actually now missing its two-tone design from the original art. Still, a lot of the little details stay true to the in-game original. For example, that cute little flip Link makes when he jumps is right out of the Game Boy. The foes get some new details too. The Buzz Blob, for instance, has visible bolts of electricity circling around its body, which is incredibly merciful. In the original Link's Awakening, you had to habitually swipe one with your sword and suffer the consequences in order to figure out that you shouldn't, do that. You can also see gels actually jumping for your head instead of just sort of being on your foot. Expanding on the visuals, the very first thing any of us saw from this new Link's Awakening was that animated intro. And oh my god, it's so gorgeous. I can't stand it. It's concrete evidence that a Zelda anime would be fantastic. Please, Nintendo, I believe in you. Don't let the mistakes of your past control your present. The original animation was much less exciting. Green and gray scale, remember? There's just little flashes of rain, the rocking waves, some lightning, a boat approaching, Link screaming. Okay. It's actually kind of exciting. Still, the new version is a lot more hype, and also takes the liberty of adding a few angles. Link's design in this animation is fully faithful to the original opening, but both designs are based on illustrations from Link to the Past. Link's Awakening is actually a direct sequel to Link to the Past, and they feature the same Link. Don't believe me? Well then I've got an awesome Legend of Zelda timeline you should check out. It'll explain everything. You can go click it if you want now and come back. Oh, and by the way, that iconic ring of clouds around the egg was actually a DX edition. The original title screen didn't have any clouds at all, probably because they already made use of all 4 shades of gray. So yeah, the remake looks better in every way, but how does it change in terms of gameplay? This new Link's Awakening is remarkably faithful to the original, but there are still some pretty major tweaks to the gameplay. In particular, there are 4 subtle things that totally change how the game plays. For the better. You'll notice one almost immediately, and it has big consequences for exploring the world. In the Game Boy version, there's a slight pause as Link travels from area to area. You see the world from panel to panel, just like the original NES Zelda, but for the Switch, it's just one smooth, seamless transition. It makes a huge difference to how gameplay feels. New combinations of visuals become possible, so you can totally get a sneak peek at locations that would have been impossible to see before. We still get a little bit of that scrolling vibe when Link goes from room to room in a dungeon, but I mean, that makes perfect sense. The second thing you'll notice is probably the single biggest difference in this game. The Game Boy and Game Boy Color just had 2 buttons and a directional pad, so you could only have 2 weapons or items equipped at one time in the original Link's Awakening. And yes, that includes your sword and your shield. You were constantly going back to the menu to swap different items in and out. But I have good news. The Switch has more than 2 buttons. Your sword and shield now have dedicated buttons, and since your shield is on the R button, holding up your shield while swinging your sword is way easier. You could totally do this in the Game Boy version, but cramming down the A while tapping the B or vice versa is way more uncomfortable. This is even bigger than slashing and shielding. Your Pegasus boots also get their own dedicated button, L. Performing a running long jump is now so much easier, and because both the Pegasus boots and your sword are always auto-equipped, you perform a running sword dash attack automatically. You can also opt to swerve a little bit while dashing, which is nice. Your power bracelet also just auto-equips. No button assignment necessary. You don't have to press anything. It's incredibly nice. Your A and B buttons are responsible for everything else, and since the game has taken 4 items off your plate, it's much less overwhelming. Now we can spend more time playing the game instead of fiddling around with the menu. It's fantastic. Another major difference is that in this beautiful post-Breath of the Wild world, the new Link's Awakening not only allows you to save any time, but the game is constantly auto-saving. In the old version, you save whenever you leave a house or a door or something. Sounds simple, but it can be kind of tricky to finagle. Like, if you die mid-dungeon, you're a little screwed. But this new version basically auto-saves every time you get a key. So dying is way less punishing. The last major tweak also takes its cue from Breath of the Wild, when we all relied heavily on that gorgeous map. Updating the map of the original Link's Awakening is to be expected, but this new map is insanely detailed. Like, you could see everything. I could be so much more calculated when planning my next moves in the overworld. Plus, in that updated map screen, you'll also find your memories. This is a different kind of memory function than the one in Breath of the Wild. You can pull up every important conversation you've had at any time. Why was this not a feature in Majora's Mask? There are several other tweaks to gameplay too. Less dramatic, but still noteworthy. Now, Link can charge into an apple tree and munch on apples for some extra health. Reminds me of all those times in Breath of the Wild when I made Link scarf down 10 uncooked apples at a time. It was useless though. I was destined to lose some of those Lionel fights. Also, your HUD gets a modern upgrade. The original had that little bar on the bottom of the screen with your health, rupees, and items. But the remake is going with what feels like Zelda tradition since Ocarina of Time. You know, your hearts are at the top left of the screen, and your equipped items are at the top right. Also, just so you aren't sweating your funds, your rupee count only pops up when you collect them. Another little way this game was brought into modern Zelda-dom is by having the name of whomever you're speaking to show up on the top of their quote box thing. It's more delightful than anything else. How else were we to know those children playing catch outside the library are named Kiddo and Junia? There are still more little differences. Names of characters on quote boxes, more warp points, and the relieving ability to catch fairies in bottles. Still, let's not forget that this is a ridiculously faithful adaptation. Believe it or not, a lot of the weapons act very similar. It literally takes the exact same amount of time for the hook shot to shoot and retract in the 2 versions. Although, in the Game Boy, Link primarily uses his hook shot on rocks, but in the new version, those rocks have been replaced by wooden crates, another staple of recent Zelda games. And if you happen to take any damage, Link still flashes red and starts blinking in and out of existence, just like the old version. So the new Link's Awakening looks better and plays better, but it sounds better too. The Game Boy could only support 4 distinct voices at any given time. That includes music and sound effects as well. Most of the music during actual gameplay only uses 2 voices, but it still managed to be catchy as hell. The new Link's Awakening kept the music of the old one because it was just that good. But chiptune is a thing of the past, so they freshened things up with new arrangements featuring real instruments played by real people. For the opening theme alone, you can hear clarinets and flutes and bassoons and all that good stuff. As much as I love them, those old beeps and boops just don't compare. Not only does the music have this new richness, that sweet, sweet fullness applies to the sound effects as well. I know I'm not the only person that really geeks out about this kind of thing. I'm sure most of you clicked this video to hear about the new sound effects, right? Think about it. Sound effects on the Game Boy were creative approximations at best. When you swipe a bush with your sword, neither the sword swoosh nor the bush falling apart sounds anything like how they would sound in real life. But this new version has a full-blown soundscape. Everything gets a sound effect. There are even background noises. I'm talking footsteps that sound different depending on what you're walking in. I'm talking birds chirping. I'm talking grass rustling. I'm talking owls landing on trees. This is exciting stuff, guys. There's even some new voice work too. Link makes little grunts when he swipes his sword, as he does. Enemies will also grunt or gurgle or whatever during combat. Heck, even even Bow Wow gets to speak up. Now it's your turn to speak up. I am hype on the new sound effects in Link's Awakening. But what's your favorite change? And if you've never played Link's Awakening, there's never been a better time to try out a classic of handheld gaming. I'm Sydney. And if you enjoyed this video, do me a solid and subscribe to the leaderboard. From indie to AAA, We love the games you play.